So a few years ago, and I should have looked up how many it was, I don't remember, I saw the movie Taken. Has anyone here seen the movie Taken? Show of hands. You sinners. Such a violent movie. Actually, it's a while since I've seen it, so I can't even remember exactly how bad it is. For those who don't know, it's the story of a man whose daughter is abducted. And it's like I say abducted, you usually think of like a small child, and this is like a teenage daughter who's been taken to be trafficked. And there's the classic line. It was almost instantly classic, where the father is on the phone with the abductor, and he says, "I don't have any money, but what I do have are a very particular set of skills I have acquired over a very long career, skills that make me a nightmare for people like you." And there's a part of me as a dad that would just love to be able to say that. I don't want my child to be abducted, don't get me wrong. But if she was abducted, I would love to be able to, especially, with his, slightly Irish, accent and the cadence he had. It's so intimidating. There's a part of me that when I watch a movie like that, I put myself in the hero place. I'm the one who's going to rescue my kid. I'm the one who's, fighting the good fight. I'm the one who's going behind enemy lines to do the thing that needs to be done. I think that's probably all of us identify a little bit with that. I think we all have a desire to protect those we love. We actually saw something earlier this week for those who follow the news, for those who follow the Oscars. There was an incident where Chris Rock, comedian, made fun of Will Smith's wife, and he went up on stage and he slapped him, and it's been some people have been talking about since. And I've seen all kinds of think pieces about this already. Who was more wrong? Was he right for going up to defend his wife? Was he actually taking agency away from his wife? She can defend herself. She's a grown woman. All that kind of stuff. But I think there's a part of us that says, when we have a loved one that's attacked, we want to go to their defense. And maybe you don't necessarily identify with that. Maybe for you it's something different. Maybe it's a particular cause that you care about. I know many of you are soldiers. Maybe you're willing to give your life for an idea or a country. Whatever it is, there's a part of us that wants to come to the defense of someone else. There's a part of us who wants to fight the good fight. And as much as you or I might want to save someone, I think we have to be honest, there's a limit to what you or I can do. Like if someone kidnapped my child, I'm afraid I would not be able to give that speech. I'd be on the phone with them and be like, I don't have any money, but what I do have are a very particular set of skills. I know how to read a passage of the Bible and figure out what the main point is. I can create a PowerPoint that helps communicate a message. It's not exactly intimidating to an international trafficker. Each one of us has a limit of what we could do. The good news is that there's nothing God wouldn't do for you, and maybe even more important, there's nothing that God couldn't do for you. See, for me, I could have the desire in my heart to go and do as much as I possibly can, but there's a limit, and at some point, it's just going to be too much for me. I'm not going to be able to go any further. But we don't have that problem when it comes to God, that God is able, not just willing to do everything for us, but He is able. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. We're doing this series called The Champion. The idea is trusting in a God who fights for you. And I noticed, a little while ago as I was reading through Scripture, Israelites were in a lot of battles. It was just the world they lived in. It was the time they lived in, the age of conquest and that sort of thing. But I noticed that in so many of their battles, God did the fighting for them. And it's not that they didn't play a role, it's just that God was the one who made the difference in their battle. So first week we talked about Exodus, and that Israel really had to do very little. It was a small step of faith, just walk out onto dry land. Moses, put your hand out over the water. God's going to do the rest. He actually sent his cloud to separate the Egyptians if you didn't hear the message, you can listen to it or watch it on YouTube. But God made the difference. And last week, again, God makes a difference. We told the story about Moses standing on the hill, holding the staff up, and whether, the battle depended on whether God was involved or not. As long as Moses was holding up his staff, as long as he was praying, then the Israelites would win the battle. But at the same time, God gave Joshua and the other Israelite warriors a role to play. They had to actually go out there and pick up their swords and fight this time. And so the idea there was that God partners with us. And this week we're going to look at how God supernaturally fought for Israel during the conquest. And there's a bunch of stories. And in fact, throughout the series, I could have done more weeks on all these different stories. And I find them really interesting. At some point, I think probably enough is enough, and you get the idea behind it. So I sort of brought a couple of them into one story, or into one sermon this week. So there's a few different passages we're going to look at. The first one is a very well-known story. The Battle of Jericho, Joshua chapter 6. And so, just to give you some backstory, the Israelites, they escaped from Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. They're wandering in the desert for a number of years. It didn't have to be that way, but they didn't fully trust God. And so God said, okay, well, I've got you out of Egypt. Now I have to get Egypt out of you before you go into this promised land. And so 40 years they're wandering in the desert, and everyone except for a couple people that came out of Egypt actually died in the wilderness. And God said, you're still my chosen people, but I kind of needed to get help you understand whose people you really are. And so now they've crossed the Jordan River, which again was a miracle in itself that you can read about in Joshua. And now they're at the first major point where they have to fight. And they come to the city of Jericho. And Jericho wasn't a big city, but it had big walls. And it's the kind of challenge where it's like, there's nothing Israel could do against this. Jericho could just shut up the walls and just stay behind the walls, and there's no way Israel could beat them. Now the gates of Jericho were tightly shut because the people were afraid of the Israelites. No one was allowed to go out or in. Here's the important thing. The Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its king, and all its strong warriors. And so, in a sense, that's where the battle is already fought and won. As soon as God says, I've given you Jericho, then we know that's the way it's going to be. It's not like God's going to say, I'm going to do my best, I'm going to try. If God says that he's going to do it, then we know that it's going to be done. And then he gives them a really weird battle plan. He says, you and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark, which is unusual. They didn't usually send the ark into battle in those days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark, each carrying a ram's horn. On the 7th day, you are to march around the town 7 times, with the priests blowing the horns. When you hear the priests give one long blast on the ram's horns, have all the people shout as loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse, and the people can charge straight into the town. I mean, can you imagine being Joshua and hearing this from God and then having to go and tell all your generals, your priests, everyone, okay, I've got the battle plan. We're just going to walk around the city. Those of us who have grown up in Sunday school, we've had the flannel graphs. It doesn't seem that strange to us because we know how it ends. But imagine being the guy who hears this for the first time. Be like, I'm sorry, what? We're going to do what? We're going to walk around and that's supposed to do something? Like once around the city and that's it? But Joshua is obedient. And so he called the priests together and he said, take up the ark of the Lord's covenant and assign 7 priests to walk in front of it, each carrying a ram's horn. Then he gave orders to the people, march around the town, and the armed men will lead the way in front of the ark of the Lord. And I'm going to read through the passage here, but a lot of it is like just sort of repeating itself. It's like God tells Joshua, Joshua tells the people, and then they go and do the thing. So after Joshua spoke to the people, the 7 priests with the ram's horn started marching in the presence of the Lord, blowing the horns as they marched. I mean, this took obedience. It also took courage. You're walking, around a city with tall walls. I don't know what kind of artillery the Canaanites might have had, but they probably had bows and arrows. And so you're kind of taking your life in your own hands as you walk around, mostly undefended. You're just trusting that God is going to do what he said he's going to do. So they marched. The Ark of the Covenant, Lord's Covenant, followed behind them. Some of the armed men marched in front of the priests with their horns, and some behind the ark, with the priests continually blowing the horns. Do not shout. Do not even talk, Joshua commanded. Not a single word from any of you until I tell you to shout, and then shout. And so, as strange as this seems, I think it might have been actually pretty scary for those inside the city. As you guys know, I'm a big basketball fan. And I always find it interesting when the guy's about to make a foul shot. What does the crowd do? They go wild, right? They try to distract him, and they wave things behind the screen or behind the backboard, and they do whatever they can to try to distract the guy. I always thought it would be so much more distracting if everyone was completely silent. Like if you could get your entire auditorium, the entire stadium to just be completely silent, and then you just hear the ball bouncing, ka-chong, ka-chong, ka-chong. And then right when the guy's about to shoot, everyone shouts. I mean, wouldn't that be so much more effective than like just constant, like, because you can just drown out what's going on, but if it's silent and then something happens, that's where the scary thing would be. And so just imagine, you're sitting in this city, tall walls and everything like that, and you're thinking, I don't know what they're doing, but they're just walking around in silence. It would be kind of eerie. It'd be kind of scary. So the Ark of the Lord was carried around the town once that day, and then everyone returned to spend the night in the camp. And again, I thought to myself, if you're a soldier in the army, you're thinking to myself, you're like, okay, I'm being obedient, but I'm sure our soldiers today never do this. They never question their leaders' orders or joke about them after the fact. But if it was me, I'd be like, I can't believe we're doing this. I can't believe this is the game plan. But they did what they were supposed to do. Joshua got up early the next morning. The priests again carried the Ark of the Lord. The 7 priests with the ram's horns marched in front of the Ark of the Lord, blowing their horns. Again, the armed men marched both in front of the priests and with the horns and behind the Ark of the Lord. Basically, it's just sort of saying the same thing over and over again because that's what happened over and over again. On the second day, they again marched around the town once and returned to the camp. They followed this pattern for 6 days. And so it comes to the 7th day. And no one knows exactly what's going to happen. I mean, certainly those in the city don't have any idea. Probably at this point, they're kind of getting bored. They're like, maybe I'm not scared anymore. This isn't intimidating. Like, I don't know what's going on. And then when they started going around the second time, it might be kind of intriguing because they've only done it once every day. And then the third time and fourth time. And finally, the 7th time around, as the priest shouted the long blast of the horns, Joshua commanded the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the town. Remember, he already did that at the beginning. He said, I've already given this to you. Jericho and everything in it must be completely destroyed as an offering to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and the others in her house will be spared, for she protected our spies. Now again, if you have not read the whole story up to now, you might be thinking, okay, what's this about? Why is Rahab the prostitute being spared? The backstory for this is that she allowed some of the spies into town. She made her choice. She said, I'm not going to put my faith in the walls of Jericho. I'm going to put my faith in a God who was foreign to her, but one that she believed was the true God. And so God said, I'm going to reward you for that. I'm going to spare you. Now, I've preached on this passage a number of times, like more than a few. And it's always one of the harder passages to preach. And it has nothing to do with Rahab the prostitute or anything like that. It's the part where it says everything in Jericho must be completely destroyed. It's a difficult thing for us with modern sensibilities to hear God tell the Israelites he has to go in and kill everyone. I mean, it would make more sense to us to say, you go in, you fight the soldiers, you kill, maybe even kill all the men. But this idea of killing everyone, I mean, you're killing women, you're killing children, you're killing everything. How do we balance that out with a God who is loving? And it's a difficult thing. Again, it's one of the hardest things that I think to communicate. It's because it seems unfair to us. But we have to understand that God is sovereign. I mean, God is entirely sovereign. So whatever God says goes. And God may choose to punish people by sending rain for 40 days and 40 nights and flooding the earth. God may choose to punish the Canaanites with the Israelite sword. A number of years later, God actually punishes the Israelites with the empires of Assyria and Babylon. God is sovereign, and we eventually have to come to the place where Job came to, where God said, who are you, O man? Who are you, a human being, to question God? And so when I come to this passage and I think, it just doesn't seem fair, it's like I hear this echo of God saying, yeah, but who are you? Who are you to question me? I mean, your whole idea of what is fair and what is right comes from the ultimate good that is God. And so if God says people need to be punished, then they need to be punished. If they need to be destroyed, they need to be destroyed. If we knew exactly what God knew, then we would want the things to happen that God makes happen. And so God sends them in. Destroy everything. And he says, do not take any of the things set apart for destruction, or you yourselves will be completely destroyed, and you will bring trouble on the camp of Israel. We actually see in the next couple of chapters that this happens because someone breaks the rule. Everything made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron is sacred to the Lord and must be brought into his treasury. It's like this is the first fruits of the conquest. And the first fruits of what you earn belong to God, is the mentality that the Israelites had, and frankly we should have as well. So when the people heard the sound of the ram's horns, they shouted as loud as they could. Suddenly the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the Israelites charged straight into the town and captured it. They completely destroyed everything in it with their swords, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, goats, and donkeys. There's no reason this should have happened. I mean, I've thought about it before, and I thought, maybe it's like as they're marching, they're making the ground unstable. When they shout, it causes some kind of, earthquake. There's no there's no way you could possibly look at this and say, well, here's why that happened. It happened because God made it happen. Because God is all-powerful, and because God said, I'm giving you Jericho, and this is the way I want you to do it. And when the moment came, the walls came down. I mean, that's the only response. If it wasn't in the Bible, you wouldn't believe this. I mean, the stories we're looking at today, you wouldn't believe the stories if they weren't in the Bible. We trust them because they're in the Bible, because they're true. But if you put this in a movie for Hollywood, the people would be like, nah, it's too far-fetched. We need to have some kind of, throw in some TNT, some dynamite, make the walls come down for a reason. It's simply because God said so. And it's hard for us to wrap our minds around that. So I'm going to fast forward to Joshua chapter 10. This is another story, another battle that goes on. Joshua and the Israelites have made a treaty with the Gibeonites, which they were sort of tricked into doing, but they're caught in it now. And the Gibeonites are under attack, and so Joshua and his entire army, including his best warriors, left Gilgal and set out for Gibeon. They're going to rescue these people. And God says, do not be afraid of them, the Lord said to Joshua, for I have given you victory over them. Not a single one of them will be able to stand up to you. Now, we have to understand, he's going up against 5 different kings here. So it's like the main group are all they're all fighting against Joshua. So Joshua would have reason to be afraid. But now that God says to him, do not be afraid, I have given you victory over them, Joshua knows that the battle is already won. And so Joshua traveled all night from Gilgal, took the Amorite armies by surprise. I mean, he's doing like an all-night march, and it's a long way. It's a long way. I think I read something like 20 kilometers, 20 miles, something along those lines. It is a long way they have to go. But Joshua traveled all night because he believed that what God said was true. And so the Lord threw them into a panic. It's basically like a surprise attack. They're not expecting Israel to be there. All of a sudden, Israel's there. And so God throws the enemy into a panic. And the Israelites, again, this is not PG stuff. The Israelites slaughtered great numbers of them at Gibeon. The Israelites chased the enemy along the road to Beth Horon, killing them along the way to Azekah and Makkedah. Basically just saying it was a rout. The enemy was like running away, and Israel was just chasing after them. It's 5 against 1, but Israel carries the day because God caused the enemy to be in a panic. But it gets even crazier than that. On the day the Lord gave Israelite victory over the Amorites, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all the people of Israel. Sorry, I skipped a couple verses. Verse 11. As the Amorites retreated down the road from Beth Horon, the Lord destroyed them with a terrible hailstorm from heaven that continued until they reached Azekah. Here's the point I want to make. The hail killed more of the enemy than the Israelites killed with the sword. So as much as it was a rout already, God sent hail from the sky to kill the enemy even more so than the Israelites had to do. So again, God partners with his people, but he sends like this supernatural disaster on the enemy. You couldn't write this. You wouldn't put this in a movie. It just seems, again, far-fetched. But because God is all-powerful, he's able to make it happen. And then it gets even crazier. On the day the Lord gave the Israelite victory over the Amorites, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all the people of Israel. He said, "Let the sun stand still over Gibeon, and the moon over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stayed in place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies. And you could look at this and say, well, of course the sun stood still. It always stands still. We're the ones who are traveling around it. But we also use terms like sunrise and sunset all the time. And so our mentality is like the sun is the one that moves across the sky, even though we know it's us moving. But whatever happened here, and again, you can't make any kind of explanation for it. I can't say, well, there was some kind of eclipse or the polar shifted. Try and come up with it. I mean, try and come up with some kind of explanation that would cause the sun to stand still in the sky for as long as it did. Because it seems like it's all day. The sun stayed in the middle of the sky and it did not set on a normal day, as on a normal day. There has never been a day like this before or since, when the Lord answered such a prayer. Surely the Lord fought for Israel that day. And then Joshua and the Israelite army returned to their camp at Gilgal. Again, you couldn't even imagine this, but God makes it happen because God is all-powerful. As much as Joshua might have wanted this to happen on his own, he couldn't make it happen on his own. And then we come to Joshua chapter 24. And this is sort of the recap of the story. Joshua said to the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says." And he starts way back at the beginning. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor. So basically, at the very beginning of our people's beginning, this is what happened. The father of Abraham and Nahor, they lived beyond the Euphrates River, and they worshipped other gods. So we found out from this that Abraham originally worshipped other gods along with his father, and probably all their family. But then God called Abraham to follow after him. And you could go through the entire history, and Joshua does. There's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then the 12 tribes of Israel, and then the story with Joseph, and they go into Egypt, and first it's a good thing, but then eventually it becomes a bad thing, and then your people were rescued by crossing the Red Sea, and then they spent some time in the wilderness, 40 years. They crossed the Jordan, Jericho. Now this is like at the end of the story, as far as Joshua is concerned. It's like the end of his life. And he's saying, think about all the history, all the things that God has done for you. He called you out of idolatry. He called you out of slavery. He called you out of the wilderness. He brought you into this land. And then he goes, when you crossed the Jordan River and came to Jericho, the men of Jericho fought against you, as did the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, add it, whatever you want. But I gave you victory over them. No matter what it was, God says, I was the one who brought you victory. And then there's this really curious verse that comes next. The translation I'm reading from says, I sent terror ahead of you to drive out the two kings of the Amorites. Other translations say, I sent hornets. And it's this one word that's sometimes translated as hornet, sometimes translated as terror. And I personally believe that God sent hornets ahead of you to drive out the two kings of the Amorites. It was not your swords or bows that brought you victory. I gave you the land that you had not worked on. I gave you towns you did not build, the towns where you are now living. I gave you vineyards and olive groves for food. You did not plant them. Again, I gave you victory. And I believe he sent hornets into the towns to send them away, to drive them away. I mean, maybe it was just a terror, a panic that made them run away in fear. But what have we seen so far? That God used very natural means. I mean, he whatever caused the Jericho walls to fall, he caused that to happen. He sent hailstones from the sky. He caused the sun to stand still in the sky. We see that God uses very natural means to make things happen. And so, I don't know about you. There was a story when I was a little kid. There was a big hornet's nest, a wasp nest, I guess is what we call them. We always called them hornets when I was a kid, hanging from a branch. And my brother and his friends and I, we all gathered up all these apples. You might see where this is going. From a distance, we were throwing, and it was a competition. Let's see who could actually hit the hornet's nest. And we threw apple after apple after apple, and we missed. And it got to the point where we ran out of apples. So I had the bright idea of going and collecting them, which were all somewhere around this hornet's nest, or wasp nest. And so I'm picking up all the apples, and my brother found one more apple. Don't get ahead of me. And he threw the perfect shot, and he hit the nest, and it fell right in front of me. And all these wasps, I was like, hey, it wasn't me, it was him. But they didn't care. And I got stung maybe a dozen times? I don't know how, yeah. Sting after sting after sting. And I can understand what a little bit of the two kings of Amorites might have felt. when God sent terror ahead to drive you out, because I was running as fast as I could away from there. And I can just imagine, if you have a huge infestation of hornets, it's going to clear out the town. If it's bad enough, it's going to clear out the town. And that's basically what happened here. Whether it was hornets or just terror, whatever it was, God was the one who gave them the victory. And Joshua wanted to remind the people of that it's God. It wasn't your sword, it wasn't your bow, it wasn't your strength, it was the power of God that brought us victory. And so here's the point of it. He says, so fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. Put away forever the idols your ancestors worshipped when they lived beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt. Serve the Lord alone. But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. Would you prefer the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates? Or would it be the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live now? But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. Joshua is saying, no matter what you guys choose, I know what's right. I've seen the power of God in my life. I've seen that God has given us the victory. So me and my family, my house, we are going to serve the Lord, no matter who else does it. And I believe that is what we are called to do today. No matter what anyone else thinks, no matter what other part of our culture believes in God, we are to say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, because we've seen his hand at work in our lives. So when you're in a battle, do everything that you can do and trust that God will do that what only God can do. Again, I might have this desire to rescue somebody. I might have the desire to fight the good fight. I might want to do everything myself. But there's going to come a time where my limitations will show. I can only go so far. I can only do so much. My very particular set of skills aren't going to do everything for every occasion. But God, not only would he do everything, but he could do everything. He has the power to cause supernatural disaster on the enemy. He has the power to stop the sun in the sky. He can do anything that he wants to. So we know that we can trust in an all-powerful, all-loving God who laid down his life for us. God has shown us that there is no limit to his love for us. There is no limit to his power. He sent his son to die on a cross to save us from our sins. And so if we're looking for a God to serve, we don't have to look any further than him. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I want to finish with Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 to 11. Well, starting in verse 5, actually. Our attitude should be the same as Christ Jesus. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. As for me and my house, that's the Lord we're going to serve. I'm going to ask the prayer team to come up.